The member for Solomon.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade and Investment. Will the minister inform the House why it is so important for our economy that the export agreement with China comes into effect this year? How is the misinformation campaign being encouraged by some unions sabotaging Australia's economic future?
Member for Solomon, resume her seat. Member for Watson.
Ministers, point of order. Ministers can only answer with respect to their own responsibility. There are ministers responsible for a free trade agreement, but today we're hearing about this new thing, this export agreement, which, whether it's come out of focus, the member for Watson,
the member for Watson will resume his seat. The member for Watson will resume his seat. The Leader of the House. The member for Leader of the House will resume his seat. Member for Gorton, I admit he's in an unfortunate position. I hear you very clearly. I've asked you a number of times to cease interjecting. You're warned. The Leader of the House.
Trade means overseas.
Well, Mr Speaker, in the same way as the Foreign Minister assisted the opposition yesterday about foreign affairs and trade, might assist the opposition businesses know that trade is about exports. Just to let you know.
Leader of the House will resume his seat. Member for Solomon will conclude her question.
Okay, thank you, Mr Speaker. So my question is to the Minister for Trade and Investment.
No, the member for Solomon will conclude.
I didn't get to ask the whole question, Mr Speaker.
I've asked you to conclude. Yeah, that's what I'm asking you to do.
So, will the minister inform the House why it is so important for our economy that the export agreement with China comes into effect this year? How is the misinformation campaign being encouraged by some unions sabotaging Australia's economic future?
I call the minister.
Mr Speaker.
Member for Hunter. The member for Hunter.
He's just practising. Soon enough.
The member for
Mr
Hunter.
Speaker, Rep's practice is very clear. In asking a question, if a member makes a claim, she should be required to authenticate the claim, and she needs to authenticate the existence of this so-called export agreement,
That's
which
a
we've never heard of.
order. Member for Hunter will resume his seat. The minister has the call.
I have. Mr Speaker, in answering this question, could I congratulate and thank the member for Solomon, because she's taken the fight up to the CFMEU and their lies and their criticisms, their xenophobic campaign in the strongest possible fashion in regards to the China Free Trade Export Agreement. I was asked, Mr Speaker, why is it so important?
Member for Gorton is warned, I remind him.
Yes, he is the export. That's what he's doing.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I was asked why it's so important for our economy that the China deal enters into force. Mr Speaker, if Australia plays its cards correctly, the next 30 years can literally be spectacular, setting up for growth and prosperity throughout the century and beyond. And I can say to my colleague who asked the question, Northern Australia can also be a big part of that success. And the reason is, according to the OECD, a surging middle class in the region around us will see 600 million people today in the middle class grow to 3 billion people, not in 100 years, not in 50 years, but in the next 35 years. It's hanging there as a major prospect of prosperity and growth for all of us over the next 30 years. And the transformation's happening now. Last year, 100 million Chinese left China for a holiday. 1 million came to Australia. China expects 200 million people by 2020. Again, just 5 years away to leave China for a holiday. The transformation in the region is well underway. And the coalition has seen, unlike those opposite, that these 3 free trade export agreements with Korea and Japan and China, and ultimately with India, they're seen as a major bridge to the extraordinary opportunities that are emerging on our doorstep. They are a crucial part of the government's plan to diversify our economy post the mining boom. And the plan is working. We've seen, if you listen, you'll find out. We've seen that with Korea and Japan, in the 6 months since we entered into force those agreements, food and beverage exports to these countries have increased by 22% and 8% respectively. At the same time, exports in those two categories out of China stalled to zero. Now that just shows, Mr Speaker, the great capacity of these agreements to increase the wealth and prosperity of all Australians in a most material way, but you have to put in place the structures. These agreements are the structures. The Minister's
time has expired. Call the member for Franklin.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade. I wondered if the Minister could tell us if any imports are allowed under the China export agreement he's just told the House about.
Minister for Trade can choose to answer. Members on my left will cease interjecting. Member for Watson will cease interjecting.
Mr Speaker, this is the sort of juvenile activity, because, of course, if Australia exports to China, China exports to us. It's an export agreement. It's an export agreement. Don't you understand? Don't you understand? That's an export for China, right? It's an they signed an agreement. But this is the level to which the opposition have taken this debate. You have not identified. You have not identified.
Just resume his seat for a second. There are members on my left will cease interjecting. Member for Barton resume his seat. Members on my left are interjecting far too often, far too loudly. I will deal with them if this continues. Has the Minister concluded his answer? No? The Minister.
China exports. They export.
Member for Jagga. Member for Grain is warned.
Mr Speaker, why are they carrying on in such a nonsensical way? Why have they not asked me one question about the detail of this issue? Right? Not one question. If you're so concerned about it, why don't you ask the person who negotiated this agreement about the detail? Why haven't you? Why haven't you? Right, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. If you shut up, I'll tell you why. You want to listen? You want to find out? The reason is that you have not identified one thing in the worker protection area that is not the same as what applied under your government. Not one thing. There is nothing to negotiate because you have not identified one thing. This has gone through J. Scott, it's going through the Senate inquiry, it's gone through all sorts of intermediaries, all sorts of research groups and others. None of them have identified. Every one of them have confirmed that what we did in this deal, if you wouldn't mind, is identical to what the worker protections were under the Korean deal, the Japanese deal, the Chile deal.
Member for
all
Rankin.
of those things are identical. And you have not laid a glove on this bill. Not a glove. And that's why you're carrying on with that nonsensical question.